What people need to know is that while Trump is in the forefront, he's also being used. You have, his interest is Trump. If it benefited him financially to be progressive, he'd be progressive. What the real people behind this is, you have Stephen Miller, who's a true believer. His master's degree was in the unbrowning of America. And you have Steve Bannon, I've seen real evil. I've literally hidden under a table in Rwanda as a perpetrator walked by with a machete. So I've seen true evil. But the difference is that I can understand evil when it comes to wanting power. I can understand evil when it's coming to wanting money. But there's a totally different evil at work here. And that is, with Steve Bannon, you have someone who wants chaos for chaos' sake. And that is very different.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Henry Bonsu. And today our guest is Mary Ann Thompson-Frenk, the co-founder and president of the Humanitarian Institute based in Texas. Mary Ann, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Fantastic. It's interesting looking at your bio, looking at what you've achieved over the past few decades. So president and co-founder of Humanitarian Institute, which is based in Texas, and you promote cultural exchange, a cultural collaboration, diversity and outreach. You also work on a range of investments looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, and you also do outreach. You help families who are homeless, who don't have enough to eat. Now, how would you react if I said to you, Mary Ann Thompson-Frenk, that you are the very embodiment of everything this current administration, the Trump administration, says it loads: diversity, LGBTQI, climate change, etc. How would you react to that?
I'd be honored.
Why would you be honored?
Well, because by virtue of circumstances I had absolutely no control in. And that's what's very important to explain to people. I've been blessed to be in a situation where I have the responsibility to be a philanthropist, because this is the blood, sweat, and tears of not just my father, John Philip Thompson, who created 7-Eleven, but just hundreds of thousands of workers around the world who contributed to a business. And many of those people, they struggled very, very hard to put food on the tables. So if you understand that we're in a socio-political, economic ecosystem that's completely interdependent with each other, then we're responsible for each other. So that means someone like me, who happens to be the very race he says it is infestation, that says is dirtying the blood of America. It means that if I'm not speaking out, then what's going to happen to the people that are less empowered, that could be fired for speaking out? So I'd be honored to say that I am everything that this administration seems to loathe.
What's it like being on the front line in the heat of battle? As we speak, the Trump administration and the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is making it clear to international students that they're not currently welcome in the United States, particularly if they have said anything un-American on their social media accounts. And the embassies around the world have been told to suspend all visa interviews. That's on the macro scale. But on the micro scale, look at what's happening on the grassroots. Look at what's happening in the universities. People are being told that unless you comply, whether you're Harvard or Princeton, we will suspend your funding. Unless you listen to what we want, unless you lean in to our agenda, you are persona non grata. What's it like to be in the heat of battle?
It's very frightening. It is very frightening. I mean, we were founded as a nation where Thomas Jefferson said that, he who'd be willing to give up freedom for a sense of security really deserves neither. And people are forgetting that. Our freedom is completely interdependent with each other. So a good example is like with the SAVE Act with women. They were trying to get, basically capitalize on people's transphobia, regardless of how you feel about it. How you feel about trans people, you can intellectually understand that if you remove their rights, you endanger your own. So he was able to capitalize on that by getting a lot of women and saying, hey, this is going to be sticking to it, the trans people who are taking away from your sports and doing that. And in reality, when he ended up passing a law that said, if you're not legally the same name right now that you were at your birth, you don't get to vote. So meanwhile, and this is what's really important that people need to understand about Trump. It's like basketball. I fake things over here, and then I actually do the pass over here. So when he was over here getting everybody up in a hubbub about how rudely he treated the leader of Ukraine, He was passing the SAVE Act over here. So, people get all riled up and then they don't realize that the real attack on rights is happening on the other side, under the table. And that's the pattern that I really encourage people to look at. When things are loud, look at what's happening under the table, because there's a lot happening under the table. And it's all legal, and it's not like they're hiding it, but they make sure they make a big noise in one place so you don't see how rights are being stripped away. And what he's capitalizing on is people are forgetting that if we take away rights from one demographic, we endanger our own. And that's what I try and convey to everybody. If you are a drag queen, if you are the most conservative Muslim, if you are a Christian Baptist, absolute diehard evangelical, guess what? You better care about each other's rights right now. Because if someone capitalizes on your hatred, you're going to lose your freedom. It's like the pastor in Nemo porn.
You, through your work, through your philanthropy, through your outreach, have a lot of contacts in the Hispanic communities, the Cuban communities, the Venezuelans who voted for Trump in their legions, huge numbers. And now, if you watch social media, if you look at reports, you see many of those people who voted for Trump are being deported. They're losing temporary protective status. What are they saying to you about it? What are you hearing?
Well, a lot of them are very confused about my perspective at the beginning, because being, I guess, a Mexican American, I like to joke that I'm Tex-Mex. But being a Mexican American, we were often viewed by many of them as a little bit of a persona non grata, and that is something that a lot of people outside the Americas are unaware of. There's a very strange idea of hierarchy between the types of Latinas and Latinos.
Is that based on color? Is it color coded?
It's based on color. How much white blood, basically, how much conquistador do you have in you, versus how much Native American. If you look like me, like I say, like Carlos Santana, it's mostly Native American. If you look like Ted Cruz, it's mostly conquistador. But we have these same old historical fights that are going on. Now, the funny thing is, as I'm speaking to you right now, I'm speaking from Madrid. So the funny thing is, the original countries that colonized, they've grown past this. I walk through Madrid and you have Native Americans from all over the Americas mixing in, and but for some reason, people in the Americas have held on to this really centuries old bigotry. And it's been that way for forever. So that didn't get lost when a lot of people came into the United States. And so with a lot of the Cubans, what was really much more relevant to them is they almost have a phobia against communism. Now, I'm not communist by any stretch, but that fear is so strong that if anyone starts speaking about anything that could be free, like free medicine, free education, and things that have historically been free, public education, they were able to really convince those people, oh, this is a slippery slide toward communism. So you have to look at it individually. You have Venezuelans that are kind of coming from some of that as well. But, you have people from Mexico that are coming from much more of a democracy. Granted, it also had the social hierarchy, Native American versus, conquistador blood and all that. But they were not coming from a fear of communism. So I think people fall into a trap when they try and lump all Hispanic, all Latinos together, because there's a variation in life experiences that reflects in how people will vote.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to the assault on a range of other services, so Medicaid, Medicare, the kinds of benefits people have gotten used to, writing off student debt, etc. What are you seeing in terms of the hardships that might be occurring now and certainly will occur in the future as a result of the legislation that's being passed both at the state level and at the federal level, the big, beautiful bill that was passed just the other day?
It's beautiful only for those who have a great deal of money, who are straight, who are white, who are perfectly healthy. What I warn people is that if you don't, and if you're male, people aren't paying attention to the writing on the wall, and the writing on the wall is saying, if you are not those things, this government is no longer in service for you. And I think people need to pay very, very close attention, because, what people forget is that education is the ladder. Education is the ladder that allows people to improve their lives. So the minute that the public education was removed, they tried to sell it as if, but we're going to have all these little things that you can actually go and get a better education at one of these private schools. And that sounds great until you really step back and you realize that there's not a private school in every corner of America. It was a massive undertaking to get public schools there in the first place. So you go to some rural place in the middle of nowhere, guess what that means? It doesn't matter if you have a voucher. You could have 1 million vouchers. You're going to still have to drive maybe 3 hours to get to school. That's not doable. So actually what they're doing is they're doing something that's going to absolutely ensure a mass group of people who can never improve their lives. They're ensuring a working class that cannot move up to a middle class. And that is intentional. This is truly an attack on making sure people cannot improve their lives to move up the economic
ladder. But hang on, Marianne, aren't many of these people Trump voters from the great rural state of Iowa, for example, from those areas which are deep red, pro-Republican, whether it's traditional or Trumpist, as opposed to the nice, funky blue states on the East and West Coast?
Yes. Well, if you look at the United States, if you look at Texas, for example, you're going to see all the big cities are a lot of blue, and out in the rural area, a lot of red. And that's where the Republicans have typically gotten a lot of votes. And, they want to maintain that and at all costs. And the way that you maintain that is you keep people ignorant. You keep people uneducated, because they've shown the more educated people are, the less likely they're going to buy into the stuff that they're selling. And it's tragic, because in the United States, I'm actually somebody that is not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm someone who's an independent, because I like to vote on the cause and on the person. But when I start looking at it in detail, what you end up seeing is that the Republicans over the last number of years, they've been capitalizing on bigotry. They've been capitalizing on, can't you get more money to you? But the idea is that they're only getting money to the wealthiest 1%. A lot of their things would help someone like me. It would actually really help someone like me. But if you have a social conscience, you understand that their entire nation needs all citizens involved, and that we're, again, interdependent. I know you get tired of hearing me saying that word, but that is the big thing that people are losing. I mean, that's why when we have a vice president that says empathy should be thrown out, the irony is that democracy cannot work without empathy. I cannot say that enough. Democracy cannot work without empathy. I don't have to agree with you, but I better be able to step out of myself and look through things through your eyes to try and understand where you're coming from. And that was the brilliant thing that the Republicans did do, is that they realized that there is a huge swath of white America that has never been given an opportunity, that has been stuck in economic challenges, and they have been there for a very long time. And understandably, they get sick and tired of being told they're privileged, because they don't feel privileged. And having been doing the humanitarian work that I've done around the country, I understand that. And I'd love to convey this to some of your viewers. I mean, just to put it in perspective, within the MIMSI Institute, we have a project called the Scout of a Box Project, which is basically meant to bring a modular building into areas where people don't have physical access to education, use Wi-Fi to enable people to have access to high school and university education. We were thinking this would be on Native American reservations and third world countries, but we hadn't even advertised it. And I get a phone call from someone from the Appalachian Mountains, and she says, you have to bring this here. We have no education. Later that month, I was going up to the White House for some meetings, and I ended up hearing from people. And I said, is it true that if you're in Appalachia, you just write them off? They say, oh yeah, we don't even try to get education out there. It's just too difficult. So the reason I'm sharing that is that there are whole areas in the United States that basically have been written off by both parties. So, but a lot of those areas are white, underserved, very, very isolated communities that don't feel like they get the scholarships. And so that's why they're resentful.
I don't understand that background, but how does that explain that they see their savior in a billionaire who was given his wealth, who's been bankrupt 6 times, and who is now being seen as the anointed one?
Because there is nothing more powerful than saying to somebody who feels that they have nothing, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. And that is where basically the progressives have not done. They blame. So as a progressive, like one of the things I'm doing in UTF Holdings, my partner, Clue and Gormo, is we need to do a social responsible investing. And we have a fund to help African Americans, Black Europeans, Africa. We have one for women, LGBT, but we're looking at how do we put together a fund that empowers minorities to invest in struggling white communities? Because it gets sick and tiring on being the person who plays the bigger person who's trying to be understanding, especially when people are sticking vitriol at you. But when I've sat down with white supremacists, and I've asked them, can you tell me? And you have to make sure it's not snarky. You have to make sure you're being sincere. Can you tell me, how has this white supremacist group help you? Is there a Ku Klux Klan small scholarship fund? Is there, is there a Proud Boy, small, business investment fund? No. Well, then tell me how I can help you. And you see recalibration go, wait a minute. You don't look like me. You have melanin and you care. Oh, I'm realizing this is genuine. Oh, okay. We can start having a conversation. And that's where we're lacking. We really need to be able to communicate with each other, understand that at the end of the day, every human being really on the face of this earth wants to be able to have access to food, clean water, be able to fall asleep, not worrying that they're going to be attacked, walk down the street feeling safe. And a lot of people feel like this is an administration that is undoing those very, very simple things.
But Marianne, how does what you've been doing at the grassroots level, reaching out across the aisle to white supremacists, telling them that actually you understand them and you want to try and help them, how can that be scaled up and worked on at a policy level with, I don't know, the senators, the Congress, women and men, the Bernie Sanders, the Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, the Chuck Schumer in the Senate, the Hakeem Jeffries in the House? I mean, they would probably run a mile before sitting down opposite white supremacists at a table.
Many of them would. But here's what I'm like. I don't know if, and I invite anyone to Google this. I mean, look at what just happened in Kansas recently. And it's really scary and ridiculous. And this is relevant to your point. But, sheriffs are using this old Wild West stuff of laws that allow them back when we were cowboys and, running around. And if you had a big gang coming into your little village, the sheriff was able to deputize like 20 people so they could have like a miniature militia to defend the town. No one has undone that law. It's just stayed in the books since way back when, and we haven't needed that law. But recently, you have sheriffs that are bought into MAGA, and they are deputizing groups of people. And just if you could see in Kansas, you have people drumming, you have white supremacist stuff, Confederate flags and all that, and they're marching. But what I see when I look in these young men's eyes is they are absolutely looking for something to belong to, something to feel like they have meaning, something that feels like they're empowered, some vehicle to basically improve their lives. And they are being distracted by a mirage, a pageantry, and the real thing that can help them improve their lives, access to education, is being removed. This is a big hoodwink on the struggling Caucasian people of America. And the sad thing is that the people that are noticing this first, because if you toss a stone in the water, the first circle around it, it was people that looked like me, it was LGBT, it was the African American community, it's the immigrant community. But guess what? If you are being sold all this pageantry while the real ladder that's helping you get out of your situation is being taken away, you're on the list of persona non grata too, because at the end of the day, all they care about are people with a lot of money who buy into their agenda. And so this is the tragedy. So when we start talking about politicians, I personally have no desire to run for politics because I think that people have to have an agenda. Even if they come with a pure heart, they have to get people to buy in and pay into campaign. So by the time they get to a position of power, they have a lot of IOUs. So I really applaud all the people in politics on doing what they do. But I think this is a time that American citizens need to work with each other. We need to not wait. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Do not wait on the politicians to come up with answers. Reach across the aisle. All of us know one person. I can't tell you how many people I am the one brown person they know. But, and I've been in many situations where I'm that in the room. But if I go in the room and I am that one brown person and I make myself approachable, and it's not easy. You're a Black man. It's not easy to be that one person in the powerful room, but you represent your entire race, your entire demographic. Many times I represent all LGBT people because I'm a bi woman. I represent women because I'm the only woman in the room. But when you go in that room and you hold your head high and you come with a genuine heart and with integrity, people do notice. People do recognize, oh, and I get tired of hearing, most of them aren't like you. You're different. It's like, actually, no, I'm not different. You're taking the time to understand me. And if I'm making a positive contribution to society, then that means a lot of other people of my demographic can also make a positive contribution to society.
Right. But when we talk about the marginalized young white men in the Appalachian area or in rural Iowa, to explain the Trump phenomenon and the almost blind loyalty to the golden calf, as it were, that's one thing.
Truly.
But yes, but what about those African American men who voted for Trump in their droves? Something like 20% this time round, I think 13% back in 2016. But you've also got very large numbers of Latin American men who also voted for Trump. What did they fear? Why did they feel this guy is going to represent my interests more than Kamala Harris?
I think there's also a larger thing happening internationally on that front. But in the United States, a lot of people are very uncomfortable with the fact that the number one demographic that is actually going into graduate school are women. The absolute number one demographic that are graduating with doctoral degrees are Black women. The number one demographic that is not even pursuing a bachelor degree right now is white men. In general, the number two demographic not pursuing a bachelor degree are men in general. So the funny thing is that they were trying to get rid of all the avenues that help minorities. Like if they had too little of one minority, they tried to open it up so that they could get more and have a more even student group. They were actually having to do that for white men and for men in general.
You're saying that men have been beneficiaries of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is now the creed that Trump is determined to drive from public life and, if he can, cultural life too.
Yeah, because what's happening, and this is something that I am concerned about, because, and I think that basically you have women for centuries. We've seen what's been going on, and our grandmother said, you better get an education. And so we've gone after it, and we've gone after it with a passion. And you have young men that all the archetypes that they have been taught, they've been taught, basically, He-Man or, military guy or, and it's all been about physical strength. It's all been about bullying. And these old Viking archetypes, are things that is not what, a man needs to be today. So you have young men going, what am I? And so you have an archetype that Trump is embodying. He's really what I call a pseudo alpha, because a real alpha doesn't need to put people down. They lead because they feel called to responsibility for the whole. And that's the difference between a real leader feels responsibility for the whole. A fake one is like, look at me, serve me. A real leader serves the whole. So real men are not being, shown as archetypes. So young men are buying into these other things. So they are lost. And, it's really an invitation for the men in America to say, if you don't like what you're seeing, step up and demonstrate what is a healthy alpha male archetype. What's happening is that a lot of young men have been feeling very ostracized, feeling demonized. And a lot of progressive people are basically saying, it's your fault. All this has happened throughout history. Well, yes and no. There is a history, but that young man may not have been the one that did it 100 years ago. So, we have to work across the aisle. We have to embrace, as women who are progressive, we have to say, not all men like that. Let's open the doors. Let's work with them. And, the young men need to take a look and say, what archetype do you really want to be? Do you want to be the bully? Because at the end of the day, the bully ends up alone. Do you want to be somebody who's a part of the community? Because at the end of the day, the real leader serves the whole.
You've talked about a history a couple of times. Let's delve into that a bit more. You're an organizational psychologist, among many other things. And one wonders what it is about American psychology more generally that 250 or so years after they revolted against the king, they've now essentially elected a new one. Yeah, absolutely. What was it that made the Trump phenomenon so plausible, so real? Because, of course, America First didn't start in 2016. It has long and deep roots.
Well, a lot of people don't understand the history, and it's really important to know. And we have two different factors of history that need to be taken into account. Many people don't realize that Abraham Lincoln published a wonderful essay just before he was assassinated, in which he said that if the North didn't rebuild the South, that everything that was, causing the Civil War underneath it would end up rising up. And of course, at that time, he wasn't just talking about slavery. He was talking about all the social impetus that was underneath the resentment. And of course, we've seen, such as here in Europe, with World War II, it happened in part because Europe tried to punish Germany instead of helping it rebuild after World War I. So similarly, these resentments have been boiling. You still have people in the South calling the Civil War the War of Northern Aggression. I mean, it is really recent. And to put things even more perspective for those watching, my father was served in World War II. I looked in a scrapbook and he saved a piece of newspaper. And on one side, it was showing when he swore, an oath to serve in the military. On the other side, it was showing that there was a reunion of Civil War veterans. So we think this is so far ago. It is not that far ago. So this is still very much part of what is happening in the nation. But what's more relevant to today, if that's kind of sets the scene, if you go back into Seattle, you'll see an era of time in which people were trying to unionize. It was changing for the better, the quality of life for workers, and the people in power did not like that. And they realized there is no way to get the populace to kind of come back and side with them, because obviously unions in that sense are really much better for them. So they end up saying, let's bring in basically Christian nationalism. And that's how they ended up combining. That's why you get this very weird economic / Christian evangelical version of nationalism pulled together. It began there, and that was in the mid 1800s. That ended up basically precipitating something that kept going, and it created the American Nazi Party. The American Nazi Party, their slogan was, of course, America first. For those that follow this, a lot of the dates that Trump has chosen to do announcements and things are very, very relevant to the people that are of that mindset. Dates are important to them, slogans are important to them, symbols are important to them. And Trump's campaign has been rife with it. So that started going all the way up. And then you ended up going all the way up to pre-World War II. We had people in our nation that invested financially to help the Nazis and invested to try and help bring up a Christian nationalist theme here. They actually got very, very close. I invite anyone who hasn't seen the movie Amsterdam. It's a little fictionalized, but it's something that you should definitely check out. In reality, there was a general named General Smedley, and he was very important because he was a war hero at the time, very popular. And the people got behind him and said, hey, we want to make you president. And at first he thought it was, okay, cool, I'll run. He didn't realize until he was on basically the then version of the internet. It was the radio, and he was live, and he started realizing, oh my God, these people aren't wanting me just to run to be president of a democracy. They're wanting to bring in, fascism. And so he took the opportunity to, on live radio, warn the American people, don't buy into this. They are trying to get rid of your democracy. Only because of that sacrifice, and they attempted to assassinate him. He survived. Only because of that sacrifice he made were we able to save our democracy. The difference is that the people that put all that money in and created that machinery, they didn't give up. After World War II, they kept going. A man by the name of Doug Coe came in, and he has a group that basically is based up in Washington, D.C. He's now passed away. He created the National Prayer Breakfast. There are some good things that were happening that he did, but the most important thing that people need to be aware of, and you can see this on YouTube, he believed that Hitler got everything right, except that he put himself at the top instead of Jesus Christ at the top. So he believed in bringing a world theocracy. So Doug Coe basically was trying to pull together people. So when you take a look at what happened in Uganda, the Kill the Gays bill, a lot of people don't realize it was made possible because of the people within Doug Coe's group. They went over to Uganda and they said, hey, I know you're trying to access the oil underneath the ground here, but you don't have money for it. We're going to go get some money from the U.S. if you will agree to pass this bill, which was the Kill the Gays bill that they'd already written. And if you'll agree to bring together all of your military, all of your education, all of your, the teachers and whatnot, all of your police, make them attend this thing that we're going to put together for a week-long intensive. So when they started going in there, it was all this brainwashing, hate gays.
It's the kind of thing that we're seeing echoes of in other African countries like Ghana, Cameroon, etc. And it's often through legislation attacking the particular minority, and then the money will flow.
Yeah, it was a lie, though, because what they didn't know in Uganda is that the Senate had already passed legislation saying they were going to give them the money. So Uganda did all this not knowing that. So this is how powerful Doug Coe and his group were. They did that as a social experiment. And that's when you start hearing about Steve Bannon. He was, in on that. So when you start hearing about all that, you start seeing how these people went, okay, this social experiment worked well. I think we can work with this. They kept going. And then they actually brought Ted Cruz in. And you can also find this on YouTube. They put a physical crown on Ted Cruz's head, said he was going to rule during the end times. I actually don't think that many of them believe it. I think they're using all this, pageantry to try and galvanize the evangelicals, their direction. And they thought they were going to be able to put Ted Cruz in what they had attempted to do with General Smedley in the past. But the thing was, no one liked Ted Cruz. And then what they never saw happening was that Trump would become some big TV star. And essentially he hijacked a over 100-year worth of worth of work to turn America fascist. So now those same people are working with Trump. So that's why people think all this came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, if you look at the Charlottesville March, the Tiki Torch March, you had, it looked like, oh my God, where are all these people coming? That was 10 years of people working with a little frog character that was popular, making all these isolated boys think that they, oh, this is the only group that will get to know me. And when they got to be of age, 18 to 21, they said, hey, let's get together. Let's have fun. They get up there. Here's some tiki torches. Let's march. Repeat after me. You get that young testosterone going. I mean, all of
These
this
are
has
the people
been
who said the Jews will not replace us. That's what they said. And
yes.
Trump said there were very fine people on both sides.
Yes, but this was a 10-year intentional effort to create that visual. So a lot of people don't realize this has all been very carefully constructed, very intentionally done. They went after gamers because they were looking for people they thought would be socially isolated and ostracized. So that's why they're doing what they do. The most important thing, if I could convey to anyone that is listening to this, and I know it will tick people off, but they do not care about you. They're using you. They're using your loneliness, they're using your frustration instead of addressing how you can be helped, how you can improve your life, which is the reality is through education. The reality is working with different demographics of people. The reality is protecting democracy. Because the minute someone takes away someone else's rights, they're actually endangering your own. That's the key to explain to people.
Marianne, you've given us quite a history there, quite a lesson. It feels like a lecture. The question is, what happens next? Because we're only about 120 or so days into Trump 2.0. What happens after a year, 2 years, 3 years? I mean, you're an independent, but you lean progressive. What happens to you? What happens to people who think like you, who want to make a difference?
What's scary to me is that, for example, we have, Food Source USA, and that's, it used to, and just to put things in perspective, under Trump's last administration, we served 2,500 families a week in Dallas alone. And under his administration, it increased to 5,000 a day. That's not because we got better at it. That's because the demand grew. And that was before some of what Trump is doing. He's trying to get rid of, if you're a veteran and you need to use the VA, he's saying you can only go there for the same kind of medical need for a limited time. Well, if you're a Vietnam vet and you've had an issue with your knees, that's not going away after that limited time. He's saying that if you use the VA, you're going to have to choose between the VA or Social Security. A lot of these people need both. These are real realities. And what I'm worried about is that right now already people are juggling mortgage, rent, healthcare, medical care, and food. And when they come to us, a lot of people wouldn't guess that they're the ones needing food. There's a family that had a child that because of the medical issues, they ended up basically having to fork over 6 figures within 1 month to save their daughter. Of course, they're going to do it. They haven't been able to get their necks above the water ever since. So the only way they can make things work is, having the free food. So, and people say, oh, well, about education. Well, they're both making 6-figure salaries, but that was a lot of money they had to fork over to save her life. So people aren't seeing these realities. And my biggest concern is over the next number of months, as Trump plays around for his ego, that essentially it's going to be the American people that have to pay. And they're going to be so distracted by hate this person, hate that person, hate your neighbor. It's their fault. And as long as you buy into hate your neighbor, it's their fault, you're not really addressing the real causes, which is basically we have an ego-based narcissist in the White House who's making decisions on what's going to make literally his own family richer, as opposed to what's going to help the American people.
A lot of Americans, Marianne, still haven't woken up to this yet, although Trump's polls are cratering, his poll ratings. But people outside the States who normally love to visit the country are voting with their feet. And as you've seen, your neighbours to the north in Canada, where King Charles was this week, have stopped coming to the States. Huge numbers, a huge drop in tourism from Germany, France, Spain, Mexico, all these places, because people don't feel the love, they don't feel secure. They're worried about their social media. They're worried about what's going to happen to them at the border. How
Mhm.
secure do you feel in your American identity? Just walking around. How free do you feel?
I don't, I don't, if I pull out my purse for you, I could show you. I have, I carry, both when I became a naturalized citizen, when I was a little kid. I have, my passport. I have been stopped. If people go to my social media, you'll see a video where I've been on a bus and a guy with a machine gun comes down the aisle, and only people that look like me, not black, not Asian, not white, only people that look like me were asked, papers, please. Out of curiosity, I sent the papers, please laws to an associate of mine in Germany and said, will you compare this? He said, it's the exact same legislation as the Nazis used for the papers, please law. They just changed the demographic they're aiming at. This has been going on for a long time, and it's not a surprise. What people need to know is that while Trump is in the forefront, he's also being used. You have, his interest is Trump. If it benefited him financially to be progressive, he'd be progressive. What the real people behind this is, you have Stephen Miller, who's a true believer. His master's degree was in the unbrowning of America. And you have Steve Bannon, who, and I've seen real evil. I've literally hidden under a table in Rwanda as a perpetrator walked by with a machete. So I've seen true evil. But the difference is that I can understand evil when it comes to wanting power. I can understand evil when it's coming to wanting money. But there's a totally different evil at work here. And that is, with Steve Bannon, you have someone who wants chaos for chaos' sake. And that is very different. And people need to pay attention that he's the one that basically helped, Viktor Orban rise to power in Hungary. And he helped reduce women's rights there back to the level of the 1960s and said it was a great trial run. Let's do it over here in America. He said that. None of this is hidden. He's the one that over in Italy created a university to create nationalists, future nationalistic leaders. And the people that were on the agenda to teach were the leader of Hungary and the leader of North Korea, et cetera, et cetera. And now he's banned in Italy. but these are things that people see here and there, and they think that they're isolated. And it's actually happening in your country, in the UK. Nigel is being backed again by Steve Bannon. So, yes. So you have to take a look at the fact that what are the patterns here? Why is somebody trying to intentionally foment chaos? Because if you go around the world and tell every country to act like it's the only one that matters, when we're literally living in a globalized society where our economies, our environment, and our sociology, where we're so interconnected more than ever before, that is formatting something that's just going to tear the world apart. So right now, you have these different agendas at work, and it's convenient for them to hold on to white supremacy, but they don't even care about the white supremacists. They don't care that they're going to get to eat. I was just listening to North Dakota, a woman saying that with their dairy farms, she said, we voted for this. We voted ourselves into bankruptcy. We knew they were going to be raiding all the immigrants. And now we have no one. We have lost about 70% of our workforce. We're all going bankrupt. That's what's happening. And you would think that America would have learned by watching what happened with you all with Brexit, but, they didn't. And, it's going to be a very, very hard economic challenge, because even if I am feeding the people that we do around the United States, even if I could if I was a billionaire and bought money, guess what? If no one is there to pick things off the vine before it rots, money can't make that happen. You don't have enough people to do it.
Marianne Thompson-Frenk, it's been quite a conversation. You've taken us to hell and back, but we're alive, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you. I would like to just leave with one thing. Do not lose hope. That is the most crucial thing. Everybody wants you to lose hope. But if you can be active in speaking out on behalf of people and say when something is not right, and if you can recognize your common humanity and someone that is completely different than you, then we can save this democracy.
Marianne Thompson-Frenk, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Trump Report.
Thank you.